It was a day in Boston when winter had forgotten itself. January 15th, 1919 was supposed to be a frigid, biting New England day. Instead, the temperature had climbed almost miraculously from near zero to above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. On the bustling streets of the North End, a working-class neighborhood of Irish and Italian immigrant families, people were out enjoying the thaw. Children in wool coats played, wagons rattled over the cobblestones, and workers headed to a nearby firehouse for their lunch break. Looming over them all was the tank. It stood on Commercial Street, a 50-foot tall, 90-foot wide cylinder of dark steel, owned by the Purity Distilling Company. It was a monster holding 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses. This wasn't the sweet syrup you put on pancakes. This was the raw, thick, dark sludge used to distill industrial alcohol for wartime munitions. For years, the tank had been a neighborhood menace. It was built fast and cheap, and it leaked. Rivets dripped with a sticky black ooze. Children would bring sticks and pails to scrape off the free candy that bled from its seams. Residents constantly complained to the company, saying that every time the tank was filled, they could hear it groaning. On that warm January day, a fresh, warm shipment of molasses had just been pumped into the tank, mixing with the older, colder molasses inside. The fermentation and the sudden temperature change were building a monstrous pressure. At 12:40 p.m., the men in the firehouse were about to sit for lunch. A worker at the docks was loading freight. A young boy, Antonio Di Stasio, was walking home. First came the sound. It wasn't a splash or a crack. It was a deep, rumbling, guttural roar, like a 1,000-pound bomb exploding. Then came a sound like a machine gun, a terrifying rat-tat-tat-tat. As one by one, the steel rivets holding the tank together shot out like bullets. The tank tore apart. In an instant, 2.3 million gallons of molasses, 12,000 tons of it, was free. It erupted outward not as a slow ooze, but as a black wave, 25 feet high, moving at 35 miles per hour. It was a tidal wave of syrup, and it had the power of a locomotive. The wave struck the first building, a firehouse, and pushed it clean off its foundation, crushing the men inside. It hit the girders of the Atlantic Avenue elevated, the city's overhead train line. The force was so great it snapped the steel supports and knocked a train car clean off the tracks. It swept up everything. Wooden tenements were flattened as if they were made of paper. Wagons, trucks, and cars were tossed like toys. A team of horses at a nearby stable, which had been waiting for their driver, were hit by the wave. They were killed instantly, frozen in their terror, and the 25-ton wagon they were tied to was found floating in the harbor. People in the street had no chance to even scream. They were picked up and carried by the wall of molasses. Some were drowned in it. Others were slammed with such force against walls that they were killed on impact. And then, just as quickly as it had arrived, the wave's initial force was spent. But the true horror was just beginning. The wave stopped moving, but the frigid Boston air hit the molasses, and the 3-foot-deep river of syrup began to thicken. It turned from a wave into a trap. It became a sticky, suffocating quicksand, a vast, brown, tar-like sea. Rescuers, sailors from a nearby ship, police, and firefighters rushed to the scene and were met with a nightmare. The air was filled with the screams of the dying, trapped in the wreckage and in the ooze. But the rescuers couldn't get to them. Every step was a battle. A man would run to help a woman, and his boots would be sucked into the muck. He would try to pull them free, and the molasses would act like a vacuum, holding him fast. Rescuers had to crawl, swim, and wade through the chest-deep glue. They found a young boy, his body entirely encased in the hardened shell. They saw a hand reaching from a pile of debris, but by the time they chopped through the wood and the hardening syrup, the person was gone. Horses, still alive, were trapped, screaming in a way that haunted the rescuers for the rest of their lives. They couldn't be saved. Police officers had to walk over, wading through the molasses, and put them out of their misery with their service revolvers. It took 4 days to find the last of the 21 people killed. Another 150 were severely injured. The cleanup was almost as surreal as the disaster. For weeks, the entire city of Boston was sticky. Rescuers, journalists, and sightseers tracked the molasses everywhere. It was on the floors of streetcars, on the seats of theaters, on the payphones, and in the carpets of homes all over the city. Fireboats were brought in to pump seawater onto Commercial Street, but it barely made a dent. They had to use sand to absorb the mess. The harbor was brown with molasses for 6 months.